Everybody, hello. Hey,
Good evening.
good evening, good evening. Okay, so today's daf is Masechta Sanhedrin Daf Kuf Daled. This is 104. So we're going to start from Kuf Beis and Beis, about 3 lines from the wide lines. We can just do a little catch up over here. Um, we're talking about again. I sent out yesterday some of a little write up on each of the kings that we're going to talk about. But the first one we're talking about again is King Achaz. 12th king of Davidic line, as you can see on the screen. He lived around 732, 716 BCE. Of course, he's the king of Yehuda, and he's unfaithful, idolatrous king, and yeah, he introduced idolatry to Yehuda. Usually, it was always by the 10 tribes. He introduced it into the Beis Hamikdash, and anyway, there's tremendous military defeats, spiritual decline, Assyrian betrayal, and he died. So the Gemara wants to say, what did he do wrong? Bita lesa avoida. So the mission, the Gemara says that he stopped the service in the Beis Hamikdash, the Chasam and Torah, and he closed all the schools that were learning Torah. Shnema, the pasuk says, Tzur tu'uda chasoim, Torah bilumudai. He tour to Uda. He stopped the Uda, which is the base of Migdash. Chasoim Torah b'limudai, and he closed the Torah with its learners. So that was Achaz. Now it's going to lead to the next question. Our Mishnah listed off those kings, those personal personalities in Tanakh that do not have the chelik and Olam Haba. So the question is, why isn't Achaz mentioned? We're going to go to the next one. Menashe, the king Menashe. He was also from Shevet Yehuda, a very wicked king. Kodar as Askaris Varas Mizbeach. He cut out in the Torah all the names of Yud Kei Vav Kei and replaced it with a name of Avodah Zarah, Varas Mizbeach, and he destroyed the Mizbeach. He dismantled the Mizbeach. Almine, his son, went one.
How did they become kings? What made them become a king?
Yeah,
How did they get elevated?
well, they're grandchildren from Shlomo HaMelech. So David had Shlomo, and then after Shlomo died, the kingdom split up. 10 tribes went to the north, and
But
the
it's purely bloodline. There's no like the people could be upset about it and not want him to be king. It's purely bloodline.
right. That's the way it was. Yeah,
Okay.
especially for Yehuda. So Menashe is the king. Menashe had a good father. His name was Chizkiah. He was a righteous king, and everybody was learning in his time. And he didn't want to get married, Chizkiah. We learned in once the Gemara, and because he had nevuah that he's going to have a wicked son named Menashe, and the Yeshayahu came to him and said, "Listen," and he got sick because of it. Yeshayahu said, "You can't think that way. You have to do your job, and whatever happens to your son is what is." So Menashe is his son, but he caught us as scars. He dismantled the mizbeach. Amain, which was Menashe's son, saraf a Torah behela shmomas al gabe mizbeach, and he burnt the Torah, and there was nobody doing any service in the mizbeach. That cobwebs, spider webs went all over the mizbeach. Nobody at his time. It was unheard of that somebody should even bring a carbon to the mizbeach. Now, it wasn't just that they abolished service and promoted idolatry, but look what the Gemara says, and this is what makes it hard to understand. Achaz hitir erva. Achaz permitted people to do arayas. Menashe, the king Menashe, ba ala chaysai. He slept with his sister. Almine, his son, ba al imai, slept with his mother. Shenema, because Gihu Amain here Ashma. Amain did more sins than his father Menashe, so he slept with his mother. It's not clear if he burnt the Torah, but one says he had slept with his mother. Amalai Imai, while they were doing it, his mother said to him, I mean, how could you have enjoyment from the place that you were born from? Amalei, Klum ani I'm only doing it to anger my creator. So that was Aman. Ki Asa Yayakim. Yayakim was a later king of Yehuda. These later kings also promoted idolatry, and he is like the last 2-3 kings before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Amar, he said, Kamoy lo yoda laguze. The earlier kings don't know how to anger God. I know how to anger God. What do I need God for? God is good for the sun, right? God created the light on the world. Let's call it. We have a certain type of gold that lights up any room. God could take his sun and we don't need it anymore. In other words, we have electricity. So they told him, the gold and silver belongs to God. God says, I own the gold and silver. So how can you say that, I have a special gold that lights up a room and I don't need God? Well, God gave you that gold. That was given to us. Whatever's in the heavens, it still belongs to God. Whatever's on planet Earth, he gave to people. So now the Gemara says, Amalei Rabba Bamori, Rabba said to Rabba Bamori, why isn't Yayakim counted as one of those kings that don't have a chelik l'olam haba? He did the most abominable, disgusting things, and some of them were on his body. What does that mean? Rabbi Yochanan once said, on his male organ, he tattooed the name of Avodah Zarah to show how connected he is with Avodah Zarah. He did something worse. He put the name of God, so to speak, on his male organ. So he did terrible things. So why isn't Yayakim as somebody considered he lost his chelik on Olam haba? This is a good question. Amalei, so Rabba Bamori answered Rabba, I don't have an answer why this king is not part of that group. I heard an answer about the plain people that you read about in Tanakh. There is a plain person on Tanakh that should have lost his chelik olam haba. Like Bilam has no chelik olam haba. We learned other things, but this person, it did terrible things. He created a whole shrine for worship, and his name was Micha. So the question is, but Micha, why didn't we count Micha? He brought Pesel Micha, a certain idol, carved image, and he's not counted as the people that lost their chelik olam haba. So answers the Gemara, fascinating, because he was a generous person. He ran a soup kitchen. So therefore, even though he caused people to do avodah zarah, he didn't lose his chelik and olam haba. Shenema kol oiva v'shav ela v'viyim. He gave to any who passed by his way to the Levim. He was always distributing food. Ba'ava bayom tzarav hikol v'yam galim. Amar Rabbi Yochanan zeh pislei shemicha. It was the plate of Micha. The Gemara is basically saying that this Micha was the one that crossed Kriyas Yamsuf and ended up in the 40 years in the desert, carried his his pesel and carried it into Eretz Yisrael. Where did he get this pesel? When Moshe Rabbeinu went to the Nile River to bring Yosef's coffin out of the Nile River, he wrote on a special piece of paper, a special thing, Alu Shar, and he threw it into the water, and somehow the coffin of Yosef came up, and this Micha saw the whole thing, and he jumped into the water and grabbed the thing that Moshe wrote, and it was this Alu Shar he threw to create the Egel, and he brought it into, so he was always involved in Avodah Zarah. Tanya, we learned in a brayso, from the city of Grav, where Micha made his little mini temple, to Shiloh, to Mishkan Shiloh, was 3 miles. The smoke coming out from each were getting mixed up with each other. There's real smoke from the Mishkan Shiloh and the smoke from this temple shrine for Avodah Zarah. So the angels of heaven wanted to kill basically Micha. God said, you have to leave him alone. Shepita Mitsuya La'ivri Dacham. He's always giving food to wayfarers. And because of this, the people of Pelegish Begiva got punished. In other words, when the Jews started to take revenge against Binyamin by the story of Pelegish Begiva, they lost on themselves, they lost 40,000 people. God said to them, when it came to saying something about Pesel Micha, you didn't say anything. But for the honor of a concubine, you are protesting. So we see that God punished the rest of the Jewish people because of Pesel Micha. That's new Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma. Rabbi Yochanan said, the fact that you feed people, it's such an important idea that to give somebody a drink or food, and because two of our relatives did not do that, we will not take a ger from that nation. The two nations are Ammon and Moab, and because Ammon and Moab did not offer us food and drink when we were passing through the deserts and passing through on our way to Israel, so they didn't offer us any food. Because of that, even though they're relatives, they're somehow related to Lot. They come from the Lot family. We come from Avram. So, but nevertheless, we'll never accept anybody who we know for sure is from Ammon and Moab. We'll never accept them as a ger, because God doesn't want people as part of the Jewish people, people who are not sharing with their food. Rabbi Yochanan didei ama machakes as a krivim, a caraveres as a chaykim, malam is ayman or shoyim, mashachina al nevi abal, v'shengagasa oilazodin. Yochanan says, giving food to somebody does all these things, and the Gemara is going to explain. Merachekes as a krivim, it distances relative. We go to Amid Aleph, Ma'amin and Moav. Because Ammon and Moav did not give us food, we distance them, even though they're our relatives, and we do not take gerim from them. Food will bring somebody far and bring him even closer. Yisrael is the ultimate person that gave food. Yisrael called Moshe Rabbeinu and invited him in when he was a fugitive to come and break bread. So therefore, Yisrael was a very hospitable person. When Yisrael became a ger and all his children, his grandchildren were ended up sitting in the Sanhedrin. They had good jobs. These families, so this Kenan family ended up being in the Sanhedrin. Who is the Kenan family? So we see the Bnei Kani family, which is from Yisro's family, ended up settling amongst the Jewish people, and they became Sanhedrin. So we see that this is all in because Yisro invited Moshe to eat and break bread. If somebody is a Rasha, but he has this one quality of running a soup kitchen, God will not punish that person. How do you know that? Micha, God should have punished him, but he did not, because he gave this food to wayfarers. And God will even put his presence on fake, false prophets. From Ida Navi was told by God to go tell Yerovam that he's going to get punished because he's setting up Avodah Zarah. And God made a promise to Idoi that don't eat that entire day. I don't want you to eat in that day. So Idoi, after accomplishing his mission, met fake Nevi'im who said, we had a prophecy from God who said you should come to eat. So they gave Idoi to eat. And then they had a true prophecy, and they told Idoi that you're going to die. You're going to die because of you violated what God told you. I'm not eating. But they had a true prophecy only because these fake Nevi'im gave Idoi and Navi to eat. because they were sitting at the table, then God, the word of God, came to the Nevi'e Habal to give either a truthful message. If you do something by mistake, God thinks you did it by purpose. What is that talking about? Rabbi Yehuda says, if Yonasan would have not given David HaMelech 2 loaves of bread, so David HaMelech would not have gone to Noiv Ir HaKahanim and asked them to feed him. And because he didn't have any food, so Noiv gave him food. Doeg said Lashon Hara to show that the Noiv people of Kahanim are rebelling against him by giving food to David. And David and Shaul HaMelech killed out the city of Noiv. Had this only came about that because Yonasan didn't give David any food when he left him. So therefore, because of that, because Shaul killed out the city of Noiv, he and his kids were killed. So that's what the Gemara says. Had it not been that if Yonasan would have given David 2 loaves of bread, the Noiv Ir HaKahanim would not have been killed. And Doeg would not have been thrown out because he wouldn't have said any lashon hara. As Shaul and his 3 kids would not have been killed. Says the Gemara. Okay, now we mentioned Achaz. That was how we started it off. Why did we count Achaz as one of the kings that did not have Olam Haba? Answers the Gemara, Amar Yirmiyah, you're right, he should not have had Olam Haba. But Shemuto ben Shnei Tzadikim ben Yosem leChiskiyahu, because he's put between 2 tzadikim, Yosem and Chiskiyahu. In other words, Achaz is the son of Yosem and the father of Chiskiyahu. Yosem was a tzaddik, Chiskiyahu was a tzaddik, Achaz was a rasha. So if you're going to say Achaz ben Chizkiah didn't have Olam Haba, or Achaz ben Yosem, it doesn't sound good. Or Achaz the father of Chizkiah, so we left it off the counting. So really, Achaz does not have Chelik in Olam Haba. But Yosef Amar, he does have Chelik in Olam Haba, because he did have a guilty conscience about this whole thing. He had a little shame for his averis that Yeshaya was coming to tell him a nevuah. Shenema, v'yom Hashem al Yishai tzein lo lirkas achaz atar shar yasher b'nechal k'tzei ta'ol sabrecha el yonah mesila stay koives. Ma koives. What was Achaz doing in koives? Ikadami de kafshei la'ape b'chalav. He covered his face out of shame, right? He put it like a laundry basket over his face, which had a lot of holes in it to let the water out. But anyway, he basically covered his face to see Yeshaya, because he knew he was doing something wrong. And we learned that if you have some embarrassment about the Avera that you're doing, God will give you a forgiveness. So therefore, he got his forgiveness just by displaying some sort of embarrassment about his Avera. So he did have Olam Haba. Now, we mentioned Menashe. So Menashe is mentioned in the Mishnah that he doesn't have Chelik Olam Haba. And Menashe, remember, he was Mizana, he slept with his sister. And he had a son, Amnon, who was so bad, he even slept with his mother. And he did it to anger God. So why is he counted as one of the kings that don't have Chelik Olam Haba? Answers the Gemara, because he had a son, Yoshiyahu, and it turned out to be a tzaddik. So this big Rasha had a son that was a tzaddik. Says the Gemara, but Menashe should not be counted as a law losing his Olam Haba, because his father was Chizkiyahu. So why did Menashe lose his Chelik Olam Haba? If you just have to be one generation next to a tzaddik, so what's the difference between Amon and who had a son Yoshiyahu, and Menashe who had a father Chizkiyahu? Answer the Gemara, Bra Mizake Abba. It's good to remember this. A son could save a wicked father. Abba loy Mizake Bra, but a father cannot save a wicked son. Diksiv ve'ein miyadim matzah. That means Ein Avraham matzah Yishmael. Despite Avraham being a great tzaddik, he couldn't save Yishmael. And Yitzchak machzilas Esav, and Yitzchak cannot save Esav. So what we're saying over here is that Menashe, his father was Chizkiyahu. His father, Chizkiyahu, could not save his Rosh's son Menashe. But Ammon, who's the father of Yoshiyahu, who was a tzaddik, Yoshiyahu, the son, could save the father, Ammon, the Rasha. And the Gemara says, Hashal da'asas lahachi, now that you say this, Achaz namaloi imnei mishum kvoidesh Chizkiyahu. And therefore, Achaz, we're not going to, Achaz had a son also who was a tzaddik. His name is Chizkiyahu. So the reason why Achaz has his Olam Haba is because he had a son, Chizkiyahu, who saved him. Says the Gemara, why was Yehoyakim counted as one of the people that lost their Chelek Mamba? And says the Gemara, because he got a really bad treatment after he died. Mishum Reb Chia bar Avod, Reb Chia bar Avod, Ksiv al Gilgoltei shel Yaakov, was written on the skull of Yehoyakim, Zois. This is what's going to happen to him. V'oid Cheres, and something else is going to happen to him. Not only was his skeleton was thrown on the floor, but something else happened to him. So, what's the story about Yehoyakim? Somehow he was assassinated. If you read what and nobody knew how he got killed, but he was killed like one would kill a donkey. Zakeni the Rapreda, the grandfather Rapreda, Ashkach Gegoltu the Havakashadi Bashari Yishleim. He found a skull that was thrown about in the gates of Jerusalem. Riksib Beta was written on this skull, Zois, this is what's going to happen to you, and something else. Kvara, he tried to bury the skull, which he's supposed to do. And somehow the skull popped out of the ground. Kavra, he tried to bury it again, it didn't get buried. Amar, he knew right away that this skull is Gilgolto Shayakim. This skull belonged to the king Yehoyakim. The Ksivbe Kvuras Kamar Yikoves Choy Vahashlet. He's gonna be die like a donkey, and you're gonna throw it into the ground and be cast about, but it's not gonna be, the ground is not gonna accept it. Amar, but he said to himself, Malkahu. Well, at the end of the day, Yehoyakim, as evil as he was one of the last kings of Yehuda, and before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, it's not nice to degrade him and shame him. Karcha b'shirah, he wrapped it up in a silk, va'osav v'sifta, and he brought it home and put it in a box. One day, his chazisi devesa, his wife found it, and his wife's neighbors told her, that's what we learned this before, that this was the itzisa kamaisa havet. She didn't know why was her husband hiding a skull. So they convinced her that this was his first wife, your husband's first wife. The Lord Kaminshallah, he doesn't want to forget her. Oh boy, so she shagra tanura, she took the skull, lit up the oven, the kaltik, and burned the skull. And then the Zakena of Rav Preda came home and he saw that the skull was burnt. This and something else. So because of that, Yehoyakim really suffered after his death. So he suffered so much embarrassment after his death. Therefore, he was zoicha to somewhat get back his olam haba. Tanya, we learned in the Brayso. Amar Rab Shimon ben Lazar. Rab Shimon ben Lazar says, Bishvil Chizkiyahu said that he deserves to be healed because he did good in the eyes of God. And so he said, Bishvil hatay be'nei sisa, I did such good things. Well, that's not, you don't tell God, I deserve what you're supposed to do for me. And then that led him to do another Avera. When the Yeshaya said, you're going to be healed from your sickness, he said, Ma'ais, prove it to me. And Bishvil Ma'ais, but he asked me, what's the sign? Nachrim achla al shulchanai. The Goyim came to eat at his table. When Chizkiyahu was healed, the sun stayed in its position for 10 hours to heal Chizkiyahu. And the king of Babel sent Chizkiyahu, get well presents. And he invited all these goyim to sit around his, Sudas Haidah, and at his table. And because he had invited goyim to sit on his table, it's not good to go out and invite goyim at your table. That's why his children were exiled from Eretz Yisrael. The Sayel Chizkiyahu, it's a proof to the Amoira Chizkiyahu, the Amar Kol Amazamin Ovid of Seich Beisum Misham Sholov. A guy invites a guy who worships idols into your house, just for a social event. and then he's a waiter to that guy. Garim goes Lebanon, if you're causing your kids to be exiled. Shinama of so the kids ended up by the king of Babel. When Chizkiyahu had these guests come to his house, he showed them all the treasures and all the good spices that he had. And also he showed him based nechaisai. What does it mean? He showed him based nechaisai. Amarav ma based nechaisai. Ishto hishkisai lam. His wife was giving them to drink. His wife also participated in the celebration, and she was like a waitress at that party. Ushmul ama beis kenazav heralehem. He showed them all his hidden treasures. Rabbi Yochanan ama zayin oichel zayin heralehem. Zayin oichel zayin heralehem. He showed them his military technology, all his, military secrets, so to speak, and he just showed it to the king of Bavel. Whatever his reason is, he was so happy getting healed, and he felt he was a tzaddik. Chizkiyahu was a tzaddik, he really was. So he didn't concern himself with Ayin Hara, and he didn't concern himself with inviting Goyim to eat at his table. And this was not a good thing. Now we're going to discuss a little bit about the next, I will stop in 5 minutes, and we're going to just discuss a little bit about the Megillus Eicha. Eicha Yashva Badad, Amar Rava. How can, alas, she sits alone. Amar Rava, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mipnei Na Loka Yisrael Be'eicha, Mipnei She'avra Ashloishim V'Shish Krisis B'Torah. Why do we pick this word Eicha? Because the gematria of Eicha is 36, and at that time the Jews were over on the 36 Averis that have chorus in the Torah. Know that in chorus in the Torah, there are only 36 Averis that get chorus in the Torah. Why is the whole Eicha written in the Aleph base? Because they violated the Torah that was given in the Aleph base. Yashva Badak. I mean, obviously, Yirmiyahu wrote this right by the destruction of the first temple. The city of Jerusalem sits alone. Amar Rava, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this is what God said. Ani amarti v'yishken Yisrael betach boded ein Yaakov el eretz dagon v'sirish av shema of Yarfatol. I said that the city of Jerusalem should be, and the city of Israel should be a place where it's totally independent. You don't have to import anything. It's self-sufficient. Now they sit alone, but they sit alone because they're like leapers. Nobody, they're in quarantine. Nobody wants to be next to him because their disease is catchy. The city that had many people. In order to get away from the shidduch crisis, they made sure that the city was very, very populated. How do you get a populated city? So the Gemara says something interesting. So the young girls would marry older boys, and older girls, the Katan, will marry young boys. So there should be a lot of children. When you marry a small girl to a small guy, to a young guy, they don't have children right away. But if one of them is more adult and mature than the other spouse, then you can have children right away. And so to make sure that the city got the population increased, they demanded that people who are katana, who are young, should marry somebody older than them, and a girl that was older should marry somebody younger than them. The city became like a widow. What do you mean it became like a widow? We didn't become like a widow. It was just like we lost our husband. In other words, basically, Jerusalem had no people after the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, but it didn't last long. It lasted only for 70 years. So it's like a widow whose husband ran away, but who has intention to return after many years. Rabbasi begayim surasi bebedinos. Amar Rava Amar Rabbi Yochanan kol mokom shein hochem nasasarim la'adoinehem. Wherever the Jews went, even when they went to exile, they became princes to their masters. Tana Rabbanan, listen to this story, and this story will stop. There were two men that were taken as hostages. They lived in Har Carmel in the north. The one that kidnapped them was going behind them, pointing a gun, and they're walking in front of them. Amalei, we go to Amud Beis. Amalei echad mehen lechaver. So one of them said to his friend, like Sherlock Holmes. He said, "Gomel shemahaleches lifonenu," the camel that's running in front of us. I look at that camel that's right in front of us. Now, remember, the captives are talking. Suma ba'achas me'einah. It's blind. This camel is blind in one eye. Utu'une shteina oidis is carrying two jugs. Achas shel yain v'achas shel shemen, one of wine and one of oil. U'shnei b'nei adam hamanhigan oisa echad Yisrael v'echad goy. And the two people that are leading this camel, one's a Jew and one a guy. Amalai shabai am k'shei oirf me'ayin hatan yoidim. The kidnapper said, "You are a nation that's not flexible. How would you know such a thing? How could you figure out with your process of deduction what's with that camel in front of us?" So they told him, a camel from the grass that's in front of it, from the side that it could see, it will eat. From the blind side that it doesn't see out of, it will not eat. And we're seeing this camel only eating from one side, so we deduce that this camel is blind in one eye. It was carrying two jugs, one of wine and one of oil. We saw wine on the floor, the liquid that was falling, maybe the jugs were had a little hole in them, so it was leaking. So for one jug, it was leaking, and the liquid sort of seeped into the ground. And the liquid was floating on top. So it must be one was made out of wine, which seeps into the ground, and one was made out of oil, it had oil in it, and it was floating. And the two people that were leading this camel, one's a goy and one's a Jew. Goy, when they were walking, they were seeing excrement on the floor. And sometimes they saw the excrement in front of them, and sometimes they saw the excrement on the side of the road. So they most knew that the Jew is the one that does it on the side of the road. And the guy, it doesn't matter to do it in middle of the road. So therefore, he said, the captive said all these simanim about the thing, that the camel that was in front of them. So Rodaf Achrem, so the kidnapper ran in front of them. He saw that they were 100% correct. They deduced correctly. So the Nashka al Rosham. So he came and kissed them on their head. And he brought them to his house. So he kidnapped these Jews, and now he sees that they're so smart. And he made them a big party, and he danced before the Jews. And he said, Baruch Shabacha Bezari Shel Avram, blessed the one that chose the children of Avram. He made Jews so smart. Wherever Jews go, they become bosses over their masters, and therefore upatram the and he let them go free, and they went back home peacefully. What a fantastic story! It should happen to all our hostages. Okay, we'll continue and catch up tomorrow, Mezashem.
Amen.